We're standing here this morning on 6th Street at the 6th Street Culvert, one of the 3 projects that have been identified in our National Fish and Wildlife funded project to mitigate flooding on the Back River. We have partnered with the Department of Natural Resources, specifically Janie Gaskin and her team, who assess culverts up and down the coast of Georgia, in fact throughout the state of Georgia, help identify weaknesses and strengths, and help us identify ways we can remediate this culvert, which currently is obstructing aquatic wildlife and water flow in the marsh.
My name is Janie Gaskin. I am a wetlands biologist at the Coastal Resources Division of Georgia DNR, Georgia Department of Natural Resources, and I work within the Georgia Coastal Management Program. My specialty area as a wetlands biologist is in Marsh Health, restoration, and working with local communities to ensure that they have healthy and resilient marshes. So I have a background in research and coastal conservation. I've been working on the coast for almost 15 years now. I started with species-specific conservation, working at Georgia Southern University and on St. Catharines Island with the Sea Turtle Nesting Beach Conservation Research and Education Program there, which is kind of how I got my feet wet in coastal conservation, and my passion for these animals and protecting them led me to kind of look at the bigger picture and realize that preserving, and conserving, protecting the individual animal is key to restoring species, but that their habitats are also a really important part of that puzzle. And so as I kind of went through some areas of professional growth, I realized that I wanted to expand outside of just St. Catharines Island, which is an amazing barrier island, but Georgia has 14 or 15 of them, depending on who you ask. But I realized that I wanted to see all of this habitat, and I wanted to have a role in protecting it for future generations. And that personal mission really aligned well with the mission of Coastal Resources Division of Georgia DNR. So that is how I was looking for roles within DNR that would give me more experience and allow me to make a bigger impact on the overall habitat of the coast. So the coast is home to almost 400,000 acres of salt marsh. It is extremely important for not just habitat for wildlife and fish species and plants, but it's also really important for humans too. It's a buffer from storms. It provides us with a lot of the oxygen that we need to breathe, and it allows for a lot of flood abatement. The system can hold a lot of water, and it's really important in nutrient cycling as well. So since I've taken my role at Georgia DNR for almost 5 years now, I feel like my eyes have been opened in all new ways, and as I've learned about all the essential functions that the marsh provides. That's kind of how this culvert assessment came up. We were really lucky in the state of Georgia that the marsh and the wetlands have been preserved, have been protected under the Coastal Management Protection Act and the Shore Protection Act since the early 1970s. So we don't have as many impacted sites as some states, but we do still have a lot of impacts. Again, our mission as Coastal Resources is to balance the needs of the human population with that of preservation and conservation of natural resources, historical resources, cultural resources, and making sure that those continue on, but still attending to the needs of our communities. And so transportation is a necessary infrastructure, right? So we see little impacts, lots of little impacts over the coast where there's a tidal stream or creek that a road needs to cross. So now a culvert is put in, and this little impact can actually have a big systemic effect when you look at the roles that these tidal streams and creeks play in the overall ecosystem of the marsh. If you have a choke point culvert that's causing a constriction, then you're not allowing fish species to go through their normal life cycle, to pass between the little estuaries where they start their life into the ocean. You're also causing large scour pools. You're causing vegetation to have changes, completely changing some of the courses of these bigger streams and creeks and having overall impacts on the river. But then again, also impacts for communities, right? We put the infrastructures in because we need roads, just like we need schools and we need power. But when the culverts are too small, sometimes we lose ability to use those roads when there's too much flooding. So the system, the marsh system that's meant to be a barrier and a hold for water gets overwhelmed. by a choke point culvert, so water's not able to pass into the system, then you end up with flooding in communities.
As we on Tybee well know.
As you on Tybee well know, right?
Our entire western shore, as it were, what we call the back river,
yes.
is that tidal salt marsh.
Yep.
We're delighted to have you up here to help us on our various projects. You are part of a group that are assessing culverts and choke points throughout the coast of Georgia, right?
Yes, that's right. Yes, so I'm the lead biologist on this survey of any aquatic barrier that's occurring in the 11 coastal counties of Georgia. So we're looking at areas where natural streams and creeks are crossed by a road, so some kind of man-made infrastructure has gone in that can cause a constriction in the flow, so changes to the natural hydrology that may not seem to have a big effect at the time, but these have big systemic effects. And then also local effects for communities, again, as you well know here in Tybee, when you have a structure that's too small, that it doesn't allow the water to go to where it needs to into the marsh, that again is there to serve as a buffer and flood abatement resource for us. If the culvert's too small, the water can't get there, so then it ends up backing up into infrastructure.
And how would you've been at this a couple of years?
Yes, yeah, so this started it actually started in early 2023. We were approached by one of our local communities in McIntosh County about a culvert that had been failing and that was very much undersized. So a very small culvert that was a big choke point on the Altamaha River, which is a really important ecosystem for us. And the idea was to apply for a grant, right, and to see, because a lot of our counties and our local areas, don't have enough money to fund some of these projects, and so we partnered with them to say this would be very helpful ecologically, as well as help the community, restore this culvert and get in, better infrastructure and something that's not failing, something that can handle more water. And so we partnered with officials from SARP to start an assessment looking at all the coastal barriers, so not just McIntosh County, but all 11 coastal counties that are in our service area, to identify any road stream crossings and then do a systematic survey of them where we take measurements of the physical structures, where we evaluate the physical structures, and we also look at the water body that's being impacted. And the goal of this is to complete this inventory so that we know all the barriers on the coast and then prioritize them by severity. So then we can also provide this data to communities to help them look for funding. And a lot of the information that we've been sharing with communities we've found has kind of not been a head scratcher for them, right? Just like on Tybee, as we talked about, when I sent you the data for Tybee, you called me and it was no surprise that 6th Street was the #1 priority here. You guys know, we'll have even people when we're stopping and we're doing measurements and our, yellow vests on the side of the road, community members, residents will stop us and say, hey, are you here to fix this? Like, are you from GDOT? And we explain what we're doing and that our goal is to work with Georgia Department of Transportation and communities and identifying these things when people stop and tell us, my yard floods all the time and I know it's because of this.
Do you have an assessment for how the Georgia coast is? Do you have any comparables nationally or?
So that's a great question, because this survey is the one that we're doing here on the coast of Georgia is actually the first one. So I've presented for South Carolina Department of Natural Resources and people from Florida Fish and Wildlife Conservation, again in partnership with SARP, to try to convince them to also take up the mantle and do surveys of their coastal barriers, because again the overall project that SARP started as a dam assessment. So we know that dams are huge barriers for a habitat and for fish, and so it started as a dam assessment and then kind of evolved into this is really great information, not just for impact of fish species, but for overall habitat health, and it ended up moving coastally. So as you referred to it, but as you know, the city of Tybee, through a National Fish and Wildlife Foundation grant, Coastal Resilience Grant, did an assessment of our back river and our marsh, which was severely impacted by Hurricane Irma back in 2017, and not quite sure what to do with it, so we did an assessment. And yes, a couple of things
came to the fore, one of which is the 6th Street culvert. And I was very interested that you sent me your report, which I had no knowledge of, and I immediately reacted. It's interesting. What is it about the 6th Street culvert that makes it so, how would you rate it?
So the 6th Street culvert ranked the highest of severe constrictions.
Severe constrictions.
Yes, so because of the size of the water body that it is impacting and the size related to the small size of the culverts that are there, they are way undersized to handle that amount of water. So it comes as no surprise that there's flooding issues. If you take that out and put in something, like a bottomless, box culvert or something like that will allow more water to flow, that water will actually leave all of the hardened infrastructure, leave the community, and go into the marsh that's prepared to handle it. So that can be a huge flood abatement for you as well. And in looking at elevation maps of this area, that was another thing that factored into our prioritizing this as one of the highest barriers really that we've surveyed so far in Chatham County. Yeah, and on the coast, yes. Yep.
And what I see is the scour. You see the marsh is gone. I have seen the water coming in and out on the tides. It looks like extraordinarily high velocity, which is probably the
It is. It's extremely high velocity. You see that the huge scour pool is again something that we measure that's in our assessment that then goes into the algorithm for prioritization. When you have a scour pool like that, that is a lot of loss of habitat. So there's no marsh growing there, so you're going to have more and more erosion. The marsh acts as a great buffer against storms, right? But not if we don't have the right species of vegetation, and they can't grow when the velocity is constantly moving sediment like that.
So you talk about the marsh's buffer of storm surge. For instance, we had Irma hit us at a high tide, so it was even exacerbated, right? There are some folks here who've lived here for quite a while who would be, I guess I would say they perceive that choke point as a safety valve of not being flooded. They've expressed concern that if we open that up, these are the folks north of 6th Street. Right. Because the open water is south. Do you have any experience with that, or is there anything you can point to that would assuage that concern? Sure.
So again, I would say the best defense against a storm are these natural resources. So as the marsh is, prepared and equipped to handle these extreme amounts of inflow of fresh water from rainfall during these big storm events. The only way that it can handle that is if it gets moved through quickly. So if you look at these areas of wetland that are around these communities, they can handle a lot of water. They can handle Irma water. May there be some flooding? Yes, but there will be a lot less flooding if those marshes are allowed to handle the water in a natural way. So by opening that up, you're actually relieving the pressure on that one system, so then you can spread out the water across that huge expanse of wetlands that you have there. That is an amazing resource that you're not really using because of the choke point culvert. So what I would say to residents is trust the system, work with Mother Nature here. The more you can allow the marsh to go back to being the way that it was, then the better it will be for everybody, and there's scientific information to back that up too.
And it feels like we are in the forefront of this initiative. Have any municipalities actually taken action to remediate their culvert?
So that's a great question. We have open dialogue with all of our communities that we're providing data to and working with them on their individual priorities, but it's really exciting to me when you called and we talked about 6th Street and your grant project, because you're actually the first to have taken a priority site and to be following through with restoration plans. So we're really excited to partner with you on this.
Delighted to have you with us. How about some other culverts? Tybee has a lot of culverts.
Tybee has a lot of culverts. So let's talk about Solomon Avenue. Not great. Do you want to talk about that one?
So Solomon Avenue culvert, which would be just east of Polk.
Poor Polk Street. Okay. Yep. So Polk Street culvert emerged as another priority. So again, This is a choke point culvert.
Those two are relatively close to each other.
They are. Yeah. And so one of the cool things that our project does is not just look at the individual barrier and its impact on the water body that it's in and connectivity of wetland habitat.
Impacted by that constriction.
That are impacted by that constriction, any constrictions upstream or downstream. And so when you actually look at restoring these things in a system, you can make an even bigger impact. So imagine releasing all of the water at 6th Street so that instead of flooding and staying in the community areas, it goes into the marsh. Imagine also releasing another choke point at Polk Street. So now you have even more water that you're removing from your community, from your roads and from your neighborhoods, and allowing to go back into the marsh and eventually the ocean.
Excellent, really good point. We came across 6th Street in the context of the marsh. We have a stormwater plan that contains other culverts, but I have to say, until you're just now talking, we haven't thought that connectivity through. I wasn't thinking 6th Street is connected to Polk, connected to Solomon, yes. But yet it is all the same marsh.
It is. It's all the same marsh, and if you look at it, there are a lot of the same tidal creeks and channels that are still maintaining connectivity, despite impacts over the years. They're still maintaining it through extreme storm events and human impacts. A wetland doesn't forget that it's a wetland, and it will do its job really well as long as we remember that too.
It's true. We find, looking back through the history of Tybee, that many of the issues that are presented today with rising seas and an increased number of more significant storms are man-made issues from 100 years ago, which we had no knowledge of any of this, but in fact, water's just trying to find its lowest point. The marsh is just trying to do what it was meant to do.
That's exactly right. The water's just trying to get back to where it belongs, in the wetland that can then process and eventually lead to the ocean. And so when we need these man-made infrastructures, obviously we need roads and communities, but we can find a way where we can coexist with them by enhancing some of their natural features of being able to move water from one area into the lower area by reducing these choke points.
So in your experience, Janie, do you have a priority or hierarchy of potential remedies? Like if
yes.
Your wish list, right?
Yes, my wish list.
What would it look like?
Yes, so obviously, having no barriers. So thinking about, what would be the pinnacle of restoration, and what I would like to imagine usually is a bridge. It's definitely something that doesn't have a bottom. So the water bottoms are very dynamic. They change. The sediment moves a lot, and usually when we have a structure that has a bottom, a culvert, a round pipe, it tends to get packed with sediment, maybe even vegetation. So then you already have a constriction that becomes even worse when it gets filled with sediment. So if you have something that's bottomless, then you remove that from the equation. Yep. So then marshes and wetlands are very dynamic, so they can do their dynamic thing and they can exhibit their behaviors and changes while still allowing water to flow and having the infrastructure that supports what we need as residents and humans. So I would say bridge or bottomless culvert, those would be the two best solutions. Then looking at something, of course we know, infrastructure, it can be cost prohibitive at times, and what we found in doing our assessments of different types of structures that exist and looking at how much of a constriction they play, we find bigger is better. So instead of having a lot of 24-inch pipes all in a row, usually some on the ends end up getting filled in with vegetation or clogged with mud, having one really large structure, even if it is a round culvert or maybe two really large structures, is a lot better than having smaller structures and having multiple structures.
We find that in the city's stormwater master plan, same thing. Bigger is better.
Bigger is better. Again, allow the water to go back to the wetland. Yep. So it started with this one culvert in one county, right? And then
because they had flooding problems.
Because they had, so it
very
failed.
Specific.
Yes, so this is a 2-lane road that a lot of people from this area use to go and come from work. School buses use it. So a really important roadway that ends up being closed when the river is up or there's been extreme flooding or tide. So multiple times a year, the structure's also failed, so it's cracked and had to be patched. So that brought all, that kind of brought it to our attention. But there's been a lot of crossover with other disciplines, even just within DNR, that we hadn't necessarily thought about. So you brought up your stormwater management plan. So I work really closely with my colleague who is the Green Growth and Infrastructure Specialist at Coastal Resources Division to look over the stormwater management plans, and we see that there's a lot of overlap in the recommendations because so many of these culverts, even though we're specifically looking at areas where a natural stream or creek is impacted, they're handling stormwater. When we test salinity at every site, even if we're on an inland site. And we've been really surprised at a lot of coastal sites that have been very much salt marsh vegetation. You can, see the river out there that have tested very fresh when it comes to salinity just because of all of the stormwater runoff that area is actually handling. I also work really closely with our coastal hazards specialist, Jennifer Klein. Again, a lot of these infrastructure pieces, like you said, we were put in, 50, 100 years ago, not anticipating all of the changes that the coast is going through now. So we're dealing with higher sea levels, we're seeing the marsh move, we're dealing with more extreme tides and storm events, and the infrastructure can't take it. So when we look at remediating something, restoring the habitat, we're also looking at resiliency, right? So we want to anticipate for the future and we want to try to build back better.
Yeah, so as you know, as we look at 6th Street, relieving that choke point, we also are developing plans for a living shoreline.
Yes.
To allow that marsh not only to grow back, but to rise
Yes.
the face of sea
Yes,
level rise.
yes. So one of our specialists, our wetlands biologist who specializes in policy, she is responsible for facilitating living shorelines all along the coast, and I work really closely with her because this type of green infrastructure goes hand in hand with any kind of marsh restoration and culvert restoration projects. So I was really excited today when we went out to see 6th Street that you mentioned that a living shoreline was going to be part of a component, because again, you're moving water from one place to another, right? So there's got to be some amount of infrastructure that goes in that's going to be sustainable, that's going to be resilient, but at the same time, if we can also put in nature-based solutions, again, working hand in hand with Mother Nature, so allowing the wetland to do what it naturally does, planting with native vegetation, using gently sloping, oyster bags or what have you. Yeah, we're creating something that is greener, that's gonna last longer, and that, in my opinion, is honestly just a lot more beautiful and better habitat too.
Absolutely, and interesting your comment about connectivity, because I think of the master stormwater plan. We on Tybee have an increasing number of sunny day floods,
Yes.
right? High tide floods.
Yep.
And people will react locally. It's my corner, it's my yard, it's this street. And having developed the plan and then having done the assessment of the back river, what we've become aware of is you have to fix a much bigger problem to fix your problem. I know that's your local problem,
Yep.
but you can't do anything about that because it's all connected.
Right. That's so true, and that's what we found. The more and more culvert assessments we do and the more data points we put in on our map, it's not just the individual culvert that of course is causing problems within the specific community, but maybe even a worse one upstream. Or maybe it's not worse, maybe it's just that there's 5 in a row that are all impacting and they cross county boundaries or city boundaries or different residential communities, and people are seeing what they see locally and not realizing that there's a bigger picture here and that you can actually intervene and make a bigger impact if you do things systematically.
So fortunately, between the stormwater plan and the nature-based infrastructure plan we've put together at the same time, from Venetian and 12th Street, which we saw, which is the south end of that marsh, to 6th Street, to 80, which we saw, which to Polk and Solomon, we really need to think that completely through. Yes, it's 6th Street and we all see it, but we need to think about what we might be inadvertently doing if we improve 6th Street.
Right.
Polk Street blows up. I don't know.
So again, I would say, trust a wetland to remember to be a wetland. So looking at things systematically, is obviously you want to take the big picture into consideration. But with the way restoration works, the way funding works and the way infrastructure, works, sometimes you do have to take small bites first, right? So doing a restoration, but anticipating that, hey, in order to make that big system impact, we're going to want to plan for this down the road. This is all one system that connects. Now, I definitely would say doing a restoration at 6th Street, starting with that, you're not going to see negative impacts. Anytime that you're expanding and you're allowing more water to go into the wetland is great, but can you make a bigger impact by looking at Polk Street and other streets? Absolutely.
Well, Janie, thank you so much for spending time. Thank you for coming to Tybee and being part of our project team that's looking at Tybee's resilience, particularly on the Back River and the marsh, and for your experience and expertise being brought to our project, particularly as it pertains to 6th Street. But you've opened my eyes to all the other culverts, which are included in the stormwater plan, but take a more significance having spent time with you. Thank you so much.
Yes, of course. And again, thank you so much for having me, and thank you for reaching out. We love providing communities with data that's going to make them more resilient and give them healthier marshes, because they provide so much to our communities too. And I really am very excited about the 6th Street project, and look forward to hearing how it's going and partnering on maybe some monitoring as the restoration progresses.
With Janie Gaskin and her team at the DNR, we're highly confident of being able to execute this project to improve the 6th Street culvert. Our timeline right now is being developed, but we think within 18 to 24 months we'll have plans to present to the DNR for approval. We're highly confident we can get this done over the next couple of years.